1698.
Wow. And that's when this was put up?
This part, yes. And then we've got the Bible.
So what are all these written down here then?
These are the births. Francis John Butler. He was born in 1875, and then it goes right the way down, Arthur Richard, right the way down to Samuel, but we haven't had a chance to put Harvey in yet. That's how long we've been here.
And all in this house?
Yes. These people worked hard to build this place and keep it generation after generation.
And you're worried?
Yes, I'm worried it's going to go.
You could lose it?
I really am worried it's going to go. We don't want to, because we want Samuel and Harvey to enjoy it. And Michael's going to be landed with a big, big bill when anything happens to David and myself, which is sad, because there's not many families who can say that the house has been handed down generation after generation.
Well, certainly not for, what, 300 or 400 years?
No, no.
Right, well, this is our workshop, which is the same age as that old bit of the house.
At the root of the Butlers' problem is the location of their home. Similar homes in their area are now worth millions. So, expensive properties, but precious little in the bank.
Yeah.
I mean, how much is it something that you think about as a family, you know, when you're talking with your dad or when you look at your sons?
Well, since my granddad died in '97, since then our family's kind of become obsessed with death. It's terrible, really.
And worrying about the effect and how you're going to keep this house.
Absolutely. I mean, you're talking through ideas, what you can do, because we're not rich people, really not, so you're limited to what you can do. But you find yourself talking to your dad who's 59, so, Dad, when you die, what should we do? And you're sort of obsessed with it, and you sort of everything else sort of goes to the wayside because it comes down to the big dark cloud you got over you, which is going to be inheritance tax. So it's hard to get away from, really.
What kind of money would you be having to pay, do you think, when your dad does die?
Well, it's difficult to say. We paid $100,000 when my granddad died.
And that was to keep this place?
That was to keep this place and my place. So that was, we took out mortgages for $100,000 then. So house prices going up the way they are, it could be anything. It could be I don't know, say this place is worth $1 million, for instance, and you're looking 300,000 or more to find, which
Have you got 300,000
no,
in your back pocket?
Not on me. I think I left my wallet in my other trousers. It's
I mean, that's a lot of money to find, isn't it?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
How would you feel if, you know, if you're clobbered by inheritance tax to such an extent that you just would have no option but to sell?
It would be devastating, really. To have to sell this place is... Well, I can't imagine doing that. It was... Well, I can't really imagine it. It would be heartbreaking, really. Somewhere that your family's lived for so long. It's sort of... it's sort of very English, isn't it? Sort of having a family living in one place. Yeah. So to have to move in just because somebody wants a tax bill seems a travesty, really.
You're after something, Jim. You've been stood there for 5 minutes.
And finding the money if you run a fruit and veg stall could be a problem too. In Albert Square, Martin Fowler lives in a 3-bed semi, worth £292,000, and shares the mortgage with estranged wife, Sonia.
She's in the house with her now.
Martin... Now, his particular situation is, of course, he's married, but estranged, but might be getting together again.
Oh, it's on, it's off, you never know.
Indeed, he's got his daughter, so got to be careful with that. So some of the thought that he would have to give is, well, where would I want my assets to go to?
So if he doesn't get back together with Sonia, let's face it, who knows, who would get hit by the inheritance tax? Would it be his daughter then, Rebecca?
He leaves the house potentially to, well, either Sonia or Rebecca, or both. Inheritance tax could bite, and you're in the worst-case scenario that you're leaving your property to somebody who suddenly has an inheritance tax bill to pay to continue to live in it.
So, a bill of £7,500 if Martin Fowler kicks the bucket.
BBC Radio 4 News.
And now it's time for Money Box Live with Paul Lewis.
Hello.
Suddenly, inheritance tax has got the nation thinking and talking.
So if you make a will, how much will it cost? How do you reduce inheritance tax? What should you do about young children? Do you need a solicitor?
Evidence of increasing widespread anxiety came in the form of a recent BBC nationwide poll.
A trust, what are the tax traps?
The result was emphatic. 59% agreed that inheritance tax should be scrapped. And 73% said that raising revenue through inheritance tax was unfair.
Simple as that. It's going to be demanded.
The nation's tax advisors are now busy organising new conferences to get the best guidance on how to help.
We're going to spend some time talking about what I call your personal brand. Who are you? What do you stand for? What makes you different? Why should someone...
Financial advisor Bhupinder Anand is a leading expert and understands why people are getting angry.
Do that. We'll have some role-play exercises. If you've worked for 40 years of your life and you've paid tax throughout your life, this is another tax on the effort that you put in over the last 40 years. So if it's a 40% tax, effectively what it's really saying is that 16 years out of your 40, that's 40% of 40 years, 16 years is being stolen by the government.
But does such popular sentiment wash with those who say inheritance tax is necessary? Ed Balls is Economic Secretary to the Treasury, the key advisor to Gordon Brown on tax.
Is it fair to say that the kind of people who it was originally thought would pay this inheritance tax when it was first established are not the kind of people who are paying it now, who are far from wealthy and yet find themselves in the position where they're being clobbered with inheritance tax?
Every year, there are 600,000 people who are sadly dying. Of those, only 36,000 pay any inheritance tax at all. So the vast majority, about 94%, pay no inheritance tax. And I think most people think it's fair that for the wealthiest people, that it's right that they make a contribution in inheritance tax. And if they weren't doing so...
But that's where the rub comes, isn't it? Because we've talked to a lot of people who, they don't have a lot of spare cash, but they've lived in a house for years. In one case, we've interviewed a family who've lived in it since the 1600s. It's now worth an awful lot of money, but they don't have the kind of money to pay the massive inheritance tax bill that's going to come their way when their parents pass on.
But you have to come back to the facts. The facts are that every year there are 600,000 people dying and leaving money. Of those, only 6% pay any inheritance tax. For the vast majority, 94%, pay no inheritance tax at all and are rightly able to give their money onto their children or to charity without paying any tax. But I think people think it's fair that the wealthiest people do make a contribution in inheritance tax. And the question is, if you abolished it, you'd have to find a way to raise that money from somewhere else. And if you were to abolish inheritance tax and pay for it by petrol taxes, that would cost 18p on every litre of petrol. If we were to cut £3 billion from our schools and hospitals, that would be a real hit in communities all around our country.
Not according to the Taxpayers Alliance, which campaigns for all taxes to be lowered and inheritance tax to be scrapped.
The Treasury could try and ignore inheritance tax if it wanted, but it wouldn't be wise. It's made a commitment to marginally increase the threshold year on year as a sort of token gesture. But the reality is house prices will probably outstrip that anyway, so the number of people who are affected by this tax and who know people who've been affected by this tax is going to grow. And when you have in a democracy a large disgruntled constituency which year on year seems to be being ignored, that's the recipe for serious political upset.
Now what about Pat with her eyeshadow and her big earrings?
It's just his old house, isn't it? Built by a bloke called Jerry, if you ask me.
Pat Evans's three-bedroom house is worth £290,000. Added to her possessions, it amounts to a tax bill of £5,000.
What are the whole inheritance tax implications there, then?
She's married, so when she dies, property will potentially go to somebody else. Some inheritance tax will have to be paid.
See if nobody objects to me having a fag in my own bedroom in my own house.
They haven't got a mortgage on that property. Of course, if somebody has a mortgage, that depresses the value of the property, so that in one sense would help, but they may find themselves having to take out a mortgage to pay that tax. And it's that bit of thought process. What's going to happen when I die? Who is going to pay? Who is going to be hit? It's that people really need to just give a little thought to.
They might even have to sell the earrings.
Hello.
Could you give us a bit of time, please?
So, when the Treasury say it's only the wealthy that pay inheritance tax, can you see a time in the future where it's your average person that pays inheritance tax?
Well, I think as we're showing, it's pretty average people in EastEnders who are within the net.
House prices have risen 180% in the last 10 years, more than double the increase in the inheritance tax limit. So more and more people are having to face up to dealing with it.